Welcome and thanks for tuning in. This is Tom Hickey from 2020 Media, and you are listening to MBT Bank's On the Scene podcast, reaching over 250,000 readers. That's a quarter of a million readers of the Jewish Ledger, WeHa.com, and West Hartford Magazine, live 24/7, 365. And before we get into chatting with today's host, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Bob Carr. Good morning, Bob.
And Tom Hickey, along with myself, Koshik Makati, and Ronnie Newton is the founder and partner in WeHa.com. Tom brings to West Hartford the Connecticut Jewish Ledger, West Hartford Magazine, which is West Hartford's original lifestyle magazine. The Taste of West Hartford, our next one's up, is coming up on this April 27th. The Best of West Hartford, and other fun events throughout the year. Post-production and distribution of our podcast is managed by Exvadio Media, a division of the Modern Observer Group of Middletown, Connecticut. And today our guest is Kyle Muncy, Director of Brand Partnership and Trademark Management at the University of Connecticut. Hello, Kyle.
Morning, guys. How are you?
Good
I'm
morning.
good.
Thanks.
So just a brief intro with Kyle is Kyle and I go back to working together since the late 1990s. And when he was assistant director of athletics and communications, and not to embarrass him because I like to do this to people on the air, is I've worked with probably hundreds of people in my career, and very few people were as competent and as, just good at their job as Kyle was. So now he's at now that he's at trademark management at University of Connecticut, and you were one of the people behind the change the logo a bunch of years ago. Is that correct? So,
Yes. Yeah.
well, let's discuss that a little bit. Like just so,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from my early days in athletics, when you and I worked together, and I was in communications, and I spent 17 years working with the men's basketball team in the communications role with Coach Calhoun and those many great teams, and after the 2011 season, which we all remember as the Kemba Walker year. I had the great fortune to transition into what this role has become. We didn't at the time have a full-time licensing director managing all of our merchandise and managing our use of marks and those things. And we had a new president on campus, and despite the success of the athletic department, the visual identity of the brand was a little bit scattered. The folks at Nike had um, done a fantastic job of sort of creating almost different brands for each of the programs: men's basketball, women's basketball, football. Many of the identities that folks have a familiarity with today, still, because we roll them out as vintage logos. So whether it's the block C for football or the interlocking UC for basketball, the C ball for the women, and our various Husky logos that we had, I think our president looked at it at the time, Susan Herbst, and said, we need to have one consistent branded visual identity. And people know us as UConn, and UConn is a brand that that certainly people equate to success. And so we worked hard with Nike to redo that. And so when I moved into that role, that was the focus 100%. It was all about the visual identity. It was all about sort of hitting the reset button on what we looked like, how that was played in on our teams, in our retail partnerships. And so, that was the start of it, and it evolved into bringing in some new retail partners to run our bookstore. Um, and right around that time, my report line moved outside of athletics to the president's office and has remained university facing. Obviously, I still generate a lot of revenue for athletics. That's what we work really hard to do, not only with licensed merchandise, but with the many strategic brand partnerships that we've worked to create, whether that's Coca-Cola or Barnes and Noble College that runs our bookstore, or M&T Bank, or DATCO, or the many other partners that we see out there. So it's been Very, very different, so for 32 years that I've been here full time at UConn, I've had, some very, very distinct roles and responsibilities um, and it's been awesome. No 2 days are alike. And I just love that. You get to still work very, very closely with athletics um and get to put some really, really cool projects in play. And when the teams are as successful as they have been, certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, it there's no lack of prospective partners. We've got plenty of suitors that come knocking on the door. So it's a great time to be here at UConn.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So one of the things I remember when you first took the role, this is quite a long time ago. I can't miss yet. Really cool, great office that you have. We You did talk. You discussed the fact that other schools, other colleges, other universities have a specific brand, and when you go to a UConn game at the time, everyone was wearing different stuff and looking different. All so that the branding was something that was this university was behind on. I didn't realize it was Susan Herbst who put that kind of process in place. Since then, you expanded out. One of the things that I recently saw you on Channel 3, I think it was, and you mentioned that you have different color schemes, as opposed to the classic dark blue and white and red. So, how does that play out with a visual? How does that play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the thing that is important for people to understand, when you're talking about a visual identity as opposed to sort of a retail offering, that those things can look and feel very differently, right? So, the obviously, and one of the conversations we have a lot with folks in athletics and with coaches is about how their uniforms are going to look, how the branding is going to look, what the color breakdown is going to be. Sort of blue being that obviously that iconic national flag, blue and white, as sort of the base of our home and away brand. We've done a really good job in the last several years of, sort of introducing the gray, introducing the red as accent colors, secondary, tertiary colors. Um, and, and that's important because in today's day and age, you've got teams that are playing, multiple days in a row. They're playing so many games in so many different places. And you've got recruits from all around the country that are looking at you. And part of the allure of for a lot of coaches and bringing student athletes to different campuses is sort of that whole swag factor, right? So, from a gear perspective, having a great partner like Nike, that can, that for a lot of different teams can really create some unique and different uniform sets that are still, at the very least, either maintain sort of that nod to the history and to the brand that we are, that visual identity, or if you go in a separate direction from it, at least you have a very, very, very distinct reason for doing it, right? And a uniqueness about, why you might be wearing retro uniforms versus wearing current branded uniforms, or why your uniform might be a different color or look or feel. And then, from a retail perspective, listen, my office is located in the bookstore now, and downstairs in the bookstore, we've got a full color palette of offering. It isn't just blue or gray or white or red, or we've got pastels, we've got fashion colors, because I think ultimately, I would love for every one of our fans to wear UConn stuff 7 days a week. But I'm also cognizant enough to understand that, that there are plenty of people that want to show a little flair, that want to show a little fashion, want to show a little bit of zhuzh, and you can't do that in navy blue and white on a daily basis, right? So, you've got to have pink options. You've got to have we've got a great Vineyard Vines shop downstairs in the store, and there's plenty of fashion color offerings for UConn tees, whether it's yellow or a lavender or a salmon or just different colors that you say, well, that's not your color. It's like, well, that's fine because the coach isn't going to be wearing that on the sideline on TV. that's something for you as the UConn fan to say, you know what? Green is my favorite color, and I love that Vineyard Vines green striped polo, and it's got a UConn logo on it, and it makes sense. It's, you're showing, you're able to wear something on an everyday basis and do it that way. And so, I think that's, again, I think understanding, one of the first things I think that was difficult for me to overcome when I came into the job was, we look at thousands and thousands of pieces of artwork on an annual basis, probably as many as 7,500 or 8,000 pieces of artwork for companies that are going to be putting product into the market. And a lot of times you look at them and you go, oof, that is ugly. Like, I just don't know that I would, but as long as our brand isn't being bastardized, as long as our brand is being, the logos and the trademarks are being used correctly, um, you approve and you disapprove things based on the brand standards, not on whether I think something is fashionable or ugly or whatever the case may be. The customer will decide. If a licensee thinks they can sell something and a retailer thinks they can sell something, then you put it on out there and you kind of let it roll, and if it doesn't sell, you won't see it again and you won't have to worry about it. So it's definitely, understanding that everybody's pathway to sort of showing their husky spirit might be different than anybody else's, and providing them all the options that you can.
What I'm looking for in a bank is one that's looking out for me, like NBT. I want a relationship and a team that supports me in my dreams. And when life gets challenging, I need a bank that's focused on what matters. Not to mention one that's been top rated by Forbes in trust, customer service, financial advice, and more. That's why when it comes to meeting my banking needs, it's always NBT. Learn more at nbtbank.com. Member FDIC Equal Housing Lender.
What happens, Kyle, with the students nowadays, the athletes? And as far as their brand is that completely separate from you? They do their own thing, or how
No,
does
no,
no?
we work really, really hard with, the last 4 years, as name, image, and likeness have, really taken hold. We have been for the past 2 years and probably trending towards the third in a row. We've been the number one school in the country in terms of NIL merchandise sales. And so, I think that, has a lot to do with the fact that we've had two incredibly successful basketball programs, and we've had transcendent student athletes like Paige Beckers and AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong and Steph Castle and Donovan Clingan and Alex Caravan. And, and when you win championships, you have people that want to buy a lot of stuff. And so that's been really cool. And, we've been able, we have NIL merchandise on sale for over 400 athletes right now. So it isn't just the basketball players. It isn't just, the superstars, the All-Americans. We've created a really, really unique program with a lot of our retail partners to make sure that, if you want to support a student athlete on the hockey team or on the baseball team or softball or lacrosse or field hockey, you can do that. And so, we're really, happy to partner with the student athletes in doing that. A lot of them take a really unique interest in that particular process, and so we're happy to support it. That's not those are not transformative dollars. Royalty dollars are much more of a passive income as opposed to sponsorships. I'm sure for people that are watching the basketball tournament go on, they're seeing a lot of our student athletes in commercials right now, and those are active sponsorship dollars that they're generating. But the merchandise is a pretty cool way for, when you look in the crowd and you look behind the bench and you see people wearing the gear of the student athletes that are in the game. I think that's the way it was intended to be, and it's good that we've been able to execute it for
Yeah.
them.
For those, who are listening, who don't know, who don't have any UConn merch, I can't imagine that. But but, how do they get it? Do they go online? Do they have to come to the, store's campus? How does that yeah.
Oh, we're really fortunate to have some great retail partners. So, obviously, if you're able to come to campus, the pilgrimage that is to stores, the UConn bookstore, which is right next door to Gamble Pavilion. It's over 25,000 square feet of retail space. It's everything UConn. So, if you can put a logo on it, we've done a pretty good job of trying to get it downstairs. Um, the shop.uconnhuskies.com is our preferred online retail partner right now.
Mhm.
That's currently Follett, which is a company that we work with. That relationship will be transitioning to a company called Rally House as we head into the summer. And Rally House is one of the biggest retail operations in the country for licensed sports. And so they'll be opening their first store in Connecticut. They'll be opening something in Manchester. They'll be managing our online sales. They'll
Well,
be managing our stadium and arena sales. So it'll really become a pretty comprehensive shopping experience for folks. And then there's other places out there like Dick's Sporting Goods, like Fanatics online. You can buy Yukon product at Costco. You can buy it at Target. You can buy it at Walmart. A lot of different places, and certainly, we do the best we can to create destination shopping experiences for folks. But certainly I would say that, over the last 10 years, that's something that we've continued to try to chip away at, and only see that getting better over the next couple of years.
like,
Oh, the pilgrimage to stores, that's always, it's worth it. No, the amount of merchandise and the variety of things that we were talking about a little bit earlier at, the co-op is amazing. I mean, I started doing work with University of Connecticut and the co-op actually at one point, as early as like 1981. And so there's two transitions there. One is the transition of the sports itself, the sports and the campus. All that has kind of grown up together. And so and much of that I think is attributed to Coach Calhoun. I mean, I think early on, I mean and Tate George and Scotty Burrell, right? That probably was the impetus of that change, right?
Yes, and the anniversary just passed, March, the 22nd. So obviously we're recording this on the 23rd, but the 22nd was the anniversary date. So,
There you go.
that was the shot, and that was sort of close to the end of the dream season, and yeah, definitely was sort of the spot that started it all.
So you being on campus, the transition that you've seen over the last 32 years, just talk about that a little bit about UConn educationally. Obviously, that you're talking about branding here, but the whole scope of the campus, what you've
Yeah,
seen.
I mean, listen, I came on campus in 1989. I was a soccer player for Joe Moroni, and and to be frank, in 1989 when I got to this campus, men's soccer was probably the biggest sport. Like, certainly, you know, football and basketball and women's basketball and others had their followers, but men's soccer was unquestionably the program that was expected to accomplish the most, had won a national championship, was a perennial Final Four contender along with field hockey. Those two fall sports really had sort of started the whole UConn, University of Connecticut thing. And It was just the middle of nowhere. It just, I think for anybody that was here, anybody that could recall it, and anybody that's been to visit the campus in the last few years, it's completely unrecognizable. So the facilities from an athletics perspective are insanely developed. But the rest of the campus similarly, it's just it is hard to believe the transformation that has happened in those, almost whatever, nearly 35 years,
mm,
um 35 plus years that I've been on campus. So it's and again, a credit to, in many ways, the successes that the men's and women's basketball programs had in the early to mid 90s, that, really got creative, incredible people in our state capital like Tom Ritter to think about how we could support our state university in a bigger and better way. And that happened. And UConn 2000 just completely transformed the University of Connecticut into UConn. And we are known, nationally as UConn. We've become, a one namer. And it's a transformation that I don't think anybody could have thought was possible.
Mm.
Um, and now, we're expected to be in Final Fours and Sweet 16s and Elite Eights and to win national championships. And we're um it's it's become a really, really spectacular place for kids to come to school. Um, I know that, we you always wish that you could have more, whether it's more money, more dorms, more opportunities, bigger and broader all around the state of Connecticut. But, that's what the work that I do and the people that we work with every day, that's what we're looking and trying to do. Um, it isn't ultimately about, um, you know, one particular class of students or anything along those lines. It's about, we've established UConn as this entity that is an incredible engine for the economy of the state of Connecticut. Um, and to hear people talk that way, and acknowledge it just so plainly on a regular basis, after 35, 4 years of being on campus it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild to think. I mean, it's just, I mean, as I said, I got the campus here in 1989 because Joe Moroni had convinced me that ESPN was, 10 minutes away from campus, and that if I came here, obviously I was going to get a job at ESPN, and um, we'd all live happily ever after. And
Mm.
so, I think it's pretty wild to see what the university's become, and to just know, I travel a lot for my job. And I can tell you, when I was in college here, and there's plenty of UConn people from the 80s and 90s that talk this way. You couldn't say UConn because in the 80s and 90s, if you said Yukon, people weren't sure whether you meant Alaska or what you meant. And now, it's funny. It's a pet peeve of mine. A lot of retro. There's a lot of retro chatter and a lot of reference to us as Connecticut, and I think that's because there's a lot of people nostalgic for the Big East, and because we're wearing retro Connecticut uniforms and all those things. But there's not a single person that's attended UConn in the last 15 years that calls us anything but UConn. And it's it's pretty remarkable. I mean, UConn is a brand that, I would put us on a really, really short list of brands that have grown in the way that we've grown over the last, 30, 40 years, to be as identifiable with, with such an incredible level of success that we have.
Mhm. Well, I'm sorry to say we have to leave it at that because we're over, but this was so interesting and so intriguing. I didn't want to interrupt, anyone, but we do have to move on. And maybe what we could do, Kyle, is have you back on sometime that isn't in March Madness. So we can let you give you some peace. But thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for listening to us. And for all of our listeners, please make sure that, hey, if I were you, I would take the trip out to stores and check out for yourself that 25,000 square foot, let's bookstore, because it sounds amazing. And you are right when you were talking, Kyle. It's been a while since I've been out there.
Well,
So
hopefully we'll win a couple titles and
yeah,
we'll give everybody a reason to come out shopping.
absolutely. It sounds great. In the meantime, we will visit. We will continue to watch UConn games. Even though they're on very late at night. Well, but who needs sleep? And we'll do our best to participate and get ourselves out to stores and check out all the merch that UConn has to offer. In the meantime, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all on the scene.